Lululemon out here, of course. We got Browns. We got Sephora. We got Club Monaco. You're going to find that the four corners here at Burrard and Robson are really where it shines. What we have is we have Roots. We have La Octane, we have Lululemon over there. They're actually building a new store for it because we just don't have enough room for all the Lululemon material. And actually we have the second largest Victoria's Secret in North America, right here. I mean, not that I've been in there poking around or anything. I'm just telling you, it's huge. Just look at it from the outside. But you'll also find that we have like codes. Oh, I should be very careful. I don't know if you guys brought your credit cards, but you could spend your life savings in a day. Look, we got Tiffany code out here. We got Louis Vuitton. We got Dior. And this hotel here, right next to us, this is the Vancouver Fairmont. Now, this was actually built back in 1939 as they were working their way out of basically the remnants of the Great Depression. Now, a couple of interesting things. You'll see the art gallery out here. I'm going to go slow by here because I want you guys to have an opportunity to see a couple of the ships up top. Now, those models up top, you'll see one, and the one is a model of the HMS Resolution, which is actually sailed by Captain Cook as they made their way into Vancouver back in late 1700s. Now, something else that's interesting here, you're going to see the Vancouver City Centre. This is really the hub of the downtown for the SkyTrains as far as like the busiest area. Okay, so you're going to see the library here, built in 2005. It was designed by Moshe Safdie, who designed it so that it was done in the style of the Roman Colosseum. Now, he wanted to have all the public space in the sunshine, so they had to rotate it 90 degrees, but actually done in the style of the Roman Colosseum. And on the day of its opening, 10,000 people all wandered at Talls, all dressed in togas. You're going to see something known as Victory Park. This was erected at the end of the First World War. You're going to find there's several monuments around for the railway workers who went off to fight the war but didn't return. In fact, one of my most favorite statues in the downtown core was for the workers who went off to fight the Great War. It was kept concurrent. I'll show you the plaque when we get down there. But look at Victory Square coming up on our left. You're going to see that they've really done a really good job with this monument here. Why we're going by here is because this is truly the hub of the SkyTrain and the C-Bus. You'll find that this one is, you can't catch the Canada line here, but you can catch the Millennium line and the Expo line, as well as the C-Bus. Now, you'll know for SkyTrains, anywhere where you see the blue background with the white T, that always indicates that there is a SkyTrain of some sort down below. Now, have a look at the sails of Canada Place. Now, Canada Place was one of the pavilions for Expo 86, and each one of those sails has 2 points. Each one of those points represents one of the provinces in Canada. The Eastern Convention Center, anybody who is taking a cruise, you're going to be able to go in those doors where it says the Vancouver Convention Center here on the east. Right at the back on the right-hand side, there is an elevator which will take you down 1 level to the cruise ship terminal floor. And that Olympic cauldron was lit for 2 hours for every gold medal that Canada brought home. Now, we are coming into an area known as Cole Harbour, and Cole Harbour is one of the more sought-after areas to live in the downtown core. In fact, probably the most. And much of that has to do with the fact that it's very, very green down here. You're going to find we have Harbour Green Park, and just down behind Harbour Green Park down there is Harbour Air. But I know that doesn't really kind of explain why people want to live down here so much. Actually, the reason for it is that there is a stipulation in the building code. And that stipulation says that for every acre of construction, there must be an acre of parkland. So you'll find down in this area that there are many, many rooftop parks. You'll find that there are, I meant to say rooftop gardens and parks. But this little area through here, you're already starting to see the tulips coming out, and through the summer, this becomes one of the just most beautiful little rides through Vancouver. can escape the traffic and see the flowers. Now, the only reason it can be called the Royal Vancouver Yacht Club is we actually have an active member from the British royal family here. So one of the members of the British royal family is storing their boat under one of these 200 blue houses. We don't refer to them as totem poles. Totem poles is actually a misnomer that was started by Captain Cook himself. Originally, he had been down in the Polynesian islands and seen the work that the Polynesians had done in stone down there. And he knew that they were worshiping them. But when he came up here and he saw some of the family and story poles in the wild, he just made the assumption that it would be the same thing as it was for the Polynesians. Now, that was actually mistaken. These actually recount stories, both family and historical, for the First Nations. And these ones are actually recreations of original works that were being lost to time and decay. They would have found most of these in the wild. Some were re-sculpted by pictures or recarved by memory. But all of them were recarved by the Burrard Band and donated to the park. So we are very glad to have them. Our largest local business, in the sense that Chip Wilson, who was the proprietor, is a pretty well a billionaire now. Now, we're making our way down to Granville Island. Now, Granville Island actually started out as just a couple sandbars. And back in the late 1800s, a man by the name of George Grant Mackay, he came down with the intention of building a wall around those sandbars on that foreshore island and wanted to fill it in with mud. But it turned out that the property itself was owned by the Canadian Pacific Railway. So William Van Horn, who was one of the bigwigs on the railway, he came down and told him, "You have to evacuate, this is our property." And well, George Grant Mackay said, "Well, I'm going to call Ontario." And he did. He actually, he appealed to Ontario, and Ontario said, "No, the Canadian Pacific Railway owns it. If they want you off, you go." So he had to leave. But interestingly enough, about 15 years later, the Canadian Pacific Railway started running into financial difficulties. And well, nobody knew what to do. But it was at this time that William Van Horn said, "Well, what about that crazy guy who wanted to build the wall around the island?" And actually, they ended up brushing off that plan, finishing the wall, and filling it in with 1 million cubic tons of cement. This gave them the opportunity to charge leases for the businesses that wanted to operate down here. And from 1906 to 1976, this was an industrial island. Now, it only changed because of all the smells and smogs that were coming off from some of the strange chemicals they were using down here for their industries. And the people in Vancouver started to complain quite voraciously to the City Hall. So it was turned into an artistic haven in 1976. And you'll find that they have done a wonderful job down here. They have thought of everything. But you'll notice that they've kept the exteriors, the original exteriors of the buildings. And that is because they have historical value. But almost every single building on this island has been filled with artistic endeavors. And so we are here right now in the corner. And you're going to see, if you just walk straight down the street, the public market is there. Now you see those striped awnings on there? There's a blue and white and there's green and white. And if you stop at the blue and white, that will take you to the farmer's market. If you go over to the green and white, it'll take you over to the public market. Now the public market is where you can go in the food court. And they've got pizza, they've got burgers, they've got hot dogs, they've got Chinese food, they've got sushi. I don't know if anybody likes sushi, but they got all kinds of really good stuff down there. Some really fish and chips. I think you guys are really going to like it. It's very, very reasonably priced as well. Now, I just want to point out Ocean Cement here. You guys got the Ocean Commotion under glass there, which is under maintenance. And you've got the silos there. Now, you notice that they painted them like characters, trying to fit in with the artistic nature of the island. And in fact, they've also wrapped some of their trucks to look like bushels of asparagus, giant strawberries, or cobs of corn. Now this is psychological, and it works very well. There's, I don't know how they figure this out, but normally, like in Vancouver, we do this really interesting thing when it comes to construction. So you'll be driving down a main road, you won't have any notice one way or another, you'll take a right or a left, and you'll find yourself just stuck in traffic. And it's because it's construction, right? And so when you turn the corner, they'll tell you there was a detour behind you about 300 meters. But it's too late by then. So what happens is, whenever Vancouverites pull up behind one of those trucks, those cement trucks, you know, a normal cement truck, and they're leaning on the horn and they're honking as hard as they can, like, just move, I gotta get to work. But of course, you know, the cement trucks never listen. But what they figured out is if they wrap them like strawberries or cobs of corn, people won't honk half as long or half as hard. So we don't know why that is. We think it's just because, you know, it appeals to the childish nature of the drivers. But when it comes to lines and trains and things like that, there's nothing better than to see number 374 refurbished, repainted, and under glass. This is the original wood-burning train that brought the original settlers to Vancouver back in 1881 to 1885. Now, we're going to talk about the people who made that very, very soon. Now, folks, we're going to be coming into historic Chinatown here. And historic Chinatown is well, it's a little bit run down. So I don't want to apologize for it yet, but I do want you to know that the Chinese started showing up in the 1850s. And this was to work in the Fraser River, actually, because we had a gold rush that was synonymous with the California gold rush. And they were originally told they'd be able to work first claims when they arrived. But however, when they found that when they got here, they were being forced to rework claims that were already classified as dry. So they were already starting to experience racism at that point. Now, that being said, they ended up coming up again in the 1870s, and this was to work on the railroad, the same train that we saw earlier there. And actually, they were doing some of the hardest jobs imaginable, some of the most dangerous jobs that anybody would ever want to do. The Europeans weren't even doing them. They were like, no way. Because they knew the chances of losing life was so high. And in fact, the Chinese ended up working mostly, 17,000 of them ended up working on a 250-kilometer stretch through the Rocky Mountains. And they were some of the hardest areas to traverse. And those are the porches that we saw in the Canadian Pacific Railway built. Well, we didn't see it, but that's what we would see. And so the thing is, the Chinese kept trying to come after that fact, but they ended up putting a head tax on them. Now, it started in the 1870s there at $50 a head. And right around 1901, it went up to $100 a head. And by 1906, it was at $150, which in today's value would be worth about $17,000 a head. Now, of course, the life that they were coming from, the Guangdong province, was much harder, and they weren't making any money out there. It was very, very rough, so they did whatever they could to really make ends meet out here. And actually, they did something that was very surprising, because they were considered to be second-class citizens at the time. But what they did shocked everybody. You see, we had this war, the Second World War, and well, the Canadians and the Americans were going off to fight this war, and they were going to fight against the Japanese at the time. And so it surprised everyone when they got ready to go board the trains, and they found all these Chinese people there. They all had pitchforks and shovels, and they were adamant about going out and fighting this war as well. Now, this moved the Canadians and the Americans so much that they actually fought for the Chinese rights, because I mean, if they were willing to give their lives to protect a country that they weren't even being looked after by, well, that's pretty moving. So, out of respect, this has been built from this monument here, this epitaph. And you have the workers of the railway as well as those who went off to fight the war. Now, the Guangdong province was a pretty interesting place. They had a lot of interesting buildings there as well. And in fact, they imported a very interesting building known as the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Classical Chinese Gardens. You're going to find that right across the street there. That was imported in about 100 crates, all weighing a ton apiece from the Guangdong province. Everything, including the river stones, the terracotta, everything in there, all came from the original building. And it was pieced together as it was, as it had looked originally in the Guangdong province. You'll not find a single screw in the entire building. In fact, you will find that every single window in there is different. There's nothing identical in regards to that. The only thing that I think really, well, I shouldn't say the only thing, not at all. It's, the whole thing's great. But what I meant was there's a waterway that runs through there. And they've actually trained the koi fish in this waterway to come swimming when they ring the gong, like little dogs. Since the 60s, it has no longer been the epicenter of commerce that it once was. And at one time, it would have been absolutely just tremendous down here. Now, I want to show you guys the Millennium Gate here. This is the Scotiabank Millennium Gate. All right, well, look at the narrowest commercial building in Vancouver. You'll find it's only 6.5 feet deep. And at one time, this building used to stretch all the way out to the yellow lines on the left. But the Canadian government came to them and said, we're straightening out the road. So we're going to take part of the building. You know, are you going to take the east side or the west side? And they're like, nope, we're taking the north side. They've been doing a lot of things to try to breathe a little new life into the area. You'll find a lot of graffiti throughout. And like I say, at one time, this was actually the epicenter of commerce for Vancouver up until the 1950s. The businessmen would come in and get everything they needed in a day here. They get their lunch, they pick up their laundry, and you know, that continued on until the 60s. Now the 60s, we started to see this psychedelic lifestyle washing its way up over the border. And well, being that we're only a few kilometers from the border, it didn't take long for the streets to have a lot of people panhandling on them, in hopes of making money for their addictions and things of that nature. Now the panhandlers are what scared away the businessmen, because they didn't want to be bothered for money every day. They just wanted to come down and get what they needed to get to work. And you'll find that on the lampposts are these golden dragons. Now, in the Chinese tradition, the dragons represent power. And the little ball that they're holding isn't a ball at all. It's supposed to be a pearl. And the pearl represents wisdom. So it's a good omen in the Chinese tradition to have the power holding wisdom. Well, I'm going to show you guys the downtown Eastside, so I would advise you guys to steel yourself for this. The downtown Eastside is something that it's kind of hard for me to show you. You know, obviously I have a responsibility to show you the truth, and the truth is that this is the poorest postal code in all of Canada. Now, of course, this started in the 60s. With a few panhandlers and whatnot, but in the 80s, Glenn Clark, who was our premier at the time, he decided that the province shouldn't have to pay for the health care of the populace. And so he decided that we're going to close Riverview and we're going to kick everybody out on the streets. And so I don't know if he saved a few dollars, but the quality of life here in Western BC has dropped significantly because of what we're seeing. And have a look at the blankets out there. Those blankets, the gear that you find on them, some of it might belong to the people who are selling it, some of it might be stolen. Now the thing is, the police will turn a blind eye to those blankets that are like little impromptu stores. And the reason is because we have virtually no violent crime down here. We have a lot of people with a lot of problems, and a lot of them are very fragile, but they're not violent against anybody else. So the police are turning a blind eye to those impromptu stores to keep them from having to turn from any violent crime. Gastown was the birthplace of Vancouver, and a man by the name of Gassy Jacker John Dayton actually paddled his way into Vancouver in a canoe with his wife, her mother, her cousin, a yellow dog, a couple chairs, and a big barrel of whiskey. Now at the time, all the buildings down here were made of wood. There wasn't actually that many buildings, but mostly it was just the Stamps Mill. And so actually, this fellow, Jackie, went around to each of the workers at Stamp's Mill and offered them a sip of this whiskey. And he promised them that if they helped him build the first saloon here in the downtown area, he would give them as much whiskey as they could possibly drink. Now, it is a very charismatic area. There was actually another fire in 1906, and they kind of learned their lesson. And so, you know, they built everything back in red brick. And actually, it's heated by a nondescript steam building in the downtown Eastside. You're also going to see a lot of souvenir shops down here. This is probably one of the best places to come for souvenirs because, well, you're only dealing with one fellow. He owns all the stores and he competes against himself. We don't know why he does it, but he does. Now, that being said, it's also a very charismatic area too. You'll find there's a lot of underground restaurants. There used to be a lot of underground taverns as well. There's still a few left. Now, that was built in 1977 after an 1800s design. A fellow from the North Shore came down to build it, and he comes down every couple of weeks to check the time, which is rarely, right? And just to reset it.